It's 5:30 a.m. in the distant Cambodian province of Bat Dombong. The sun peaks above the horizon as the local market begins hauling in fresh produce for the day. Having dragged myself out of bed and into the common room, I lie on the floor of our 2-story apartment, still exhausted, searching for motivation to do something exercise-related. A few push-ups at least. In the background, the Piano Guy's 2012 piece, The Cello Song, plays, the arresting fusion of its 8 distinct cellos washing over me. I could have never imagined then, during my mission, that 10 years later I'd have the chance to speak with the creator and performer of that song, Cello Guy Stephen Sharp Nelson, about his own mission. Yet, here we are. Steve's best known for his role in the Piano Guys, a musical group famous for their unique blend of classical and contemporary music. They've released 13 albums, 8 of which have reached #1 on Billboard's classical or New Age albums charts. The Piano Guys are renowned for performing in breathtaking locations around the world, including atop the Great Wall of China, beside the ruins of Petra, inside the Midway Ice Castles, at the edge of southern Utah's Red Rock Cliffs, and in front of the Lincoln Memorial during a presidential inauguration, among many other stunning venues. Their music videos on YouTube have amassed over 2.4 billion views. Steve, for his part, is a pioneer in cello percussion. Think August Rush for the cello. In addition to his accomplishments with the Piano Guys, he's released 3 solo albums and holds degrees in music and public administration from the University of Utah. Steve served his mission in both South Korea and New York from 1995 to 1997. By now I've spoken to many people about their mission experiences, but I'm not sure I've met anyone with as much passion for their missionary service as Steve has for his. That's really saying something. In this episode, my sister, Skibby, a musical virtuoso in her own right, joins me to talk with Steve about his winding road to a musical career, quoting King Benjamin atop Chichen Itza, the innate value of classical music, how missions promote a deep gratitude for the most basic things of life, relationships forged on and because of the mission, and much more. All this coming up next.
The hardest part about religion right now, our spirituality is not declined in the United States. In fact, 80% of people still believe in God, according to a recent research study that was just released. But like 20% identify with an organized religion. And that has just plummeted in the last 10 years. So it's the rise of the nuns. Have you heard that? Nun meaning N-O-N-E, not N-U-N. I'm not affiliated with any religion. And a lot of it has to do with this principle that we're talking about. We're trying to understand that this is not a give me, it's what can I give culture.
Yeah,
and that's the challenge. And I've tried to teach my kids that. They're like, oh, church is boring. And it's like, well, okay, so you're looking to get instead of give. Or if somebody's like, I'm out of the church, okay, I could usually diagnose and say it's probably because they were expecting to get something rather than give something.
Oh, I agree with that. I think especially with the YSAs, that was the hardest thing for me when I was in YSAs. Like, my experience, it felt like it set me up to be a taker, right? Everything is like, how can we give to you guys? Do you guys want to have a slip and slide party, or do you want to do this or that? And you lose a lot of the element of serving people and feeling like you're doing something like a mission, right? That's why missions are so good. You're serving, you're doing all this stuff. And then you come home and it's like, okay, your kids again, you guys want to have a Nerf party for our activity this week? It's like, this is stupid. You know what I mean?
I love that perspective, Sam. I get that.
I think people's faith, their desire to be part of the organization dies on the vine when that happens, because they're like, I'm not needed. I'm not helping anybody anymore.
Yeah. And if we're not helping everybody get in a lattice work that's all connecting to Jesus, it's worthless. It just, in the end, it really is.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
Thank you. I love it. I actually really enjoy it.
Good.
I'm the only one in all of the leadership, bishops, high council, stake presidency that still have young kids at home. And so it was like a big deal to accept it and go all in for it. But honestly, everything I have in my life is because of God. And so when he comes calling, I raise my hand. I keep my hand in the air. And when he asks, I show up. And most of the time, I'm probably a less effective instrument in his hands, but I show up and he knows I will show up. And I'm willing to listen and make mistakes and not be afraid of putting myself out there, asking the right questions. Because I really think that we need to reframe our whole gospel mentality to a gospel of questions, not a gospel of sermons, and a gospel of judgment and boxes, like putting everything in labels and boxes and everything. It's a gospel of inspired questions. And that's been a really fun journey for me, especially in this YSA world. It's a great place because it's the decade of decisions. And so it's a really great place to practice inspired questions.
Yeah. Well, Matt, now I kind of want to be a member of your stake. Speak like that.
We would love to
inspiring.
have you. We would love to have you.
Well, you'll have to come. You'll have to have my wife and my daughter too. So
no slip and slide parties, I promise.
Okay. Okay, fair deal. The first question is basic. It's just, how did you find your way into a career as a musician?
Well, I promised my wife that I would never be a full-time musician. One of my first promises I'd broken to my wife. That's really sad. And you know what? Your listeners, I'm sure they're grappling with what kind of career should I go after? It's a huge decision. And some people say God doesn't care. I don't know if I love when people say that, because I think he cares about everything in your life. I really do. And he cares about you, and he cares about helping you to become who you're supposed to become. And a career is a giant part of that. So I really don't buy that. I don't buy the God doesn't care thing that I've heard often said. I get what maybe they're trying to hint at, which is you could do pretty much anything you want, but glorify him in it. Be an instrument. Give more than you get, like we were just talking about. But for me, I think if you're going to choose a career as arduous, I almost want to say adversarial when it comes to finding success and the pittance that most people make when they're going after something like this, my belief is that you shouldn't choose it unless it chooses you. And my recommendation is if you're going to choose a career in art or something that is not as financially viable or doesn't really fit into the remuneration categories that the traditional science or technically based careers do, I say go after it. But this is what I would suggest, is if you jump in too early, you will become a slave to it and you will actually be in an adversarial relationship. In other words, you will grow to dislike it. Something that you loved and were so passionate about, when you live your dream, there are side effects. It becomes a nightmare unless it stays as a dream for you, as a passion. And the only way to do that at the outset, and people will disagree with me, but this is my opinion, is do not do it full time from the get-go. Do it as moonlighting, as a part-time, as a side hustle. Make enough in a career that you can tolerate, that's palatable, or that's fulfilling. I mean, that's even better. When I was doing music on the side, I was in venture capital. I was in real estate development. I was in venture philanthropy. I was really enjoying what I was learning. It still wasn't my fish in water feeling. I still didn't feel like I was in my natural habitat, but I did feel like I was skirting around it and really learning wonderful things that were portable enough to take anywhere I wanted in a career. But I would recommend, if your passion does not compensate you, if it doesn't pay very well, let's just go very basic. If it doesn't pay very well, but you love it, it's your passion, you feel gifted in it, my recommendation is to work in a career you can tolerate, you can enjoy enough where it makes the living, but gives you flexibility. Look for flexibility and quality of life enough where you can work a side hustle. And then if that side hustle outgrows your day job, that's exactly what happened to me. I was working as a musician moonlighting, and we put up a couple videos on YouTube, and they blew up so much that it demanded me. It demanded my full attention and my full day. And that's a wonderful thing if you can get there. I'm not a formulaic person. I don't really think gospel formulas, career formulas, and nice packaged, beautiful TikTok-based formulas really are realistic, because they try to be one size fits all. And we're just too different as human beings. And thank the good Lord above for that. I'm so grateful for that. I would think of it more as a Venn diagram. And one circle is what you're passionate about. And that's an easy one to nail. What keeps you up at night? What gets you so excited that you start speeding up when you talk about it to others, right? The next one is what you're naturally good at. That's a difference. Hey, I am passionate about sushi. I took a sushi class. The instructor said I was the worst sushi chef he has ever seen. And I felt like I deserved a trophy or something as a result. Like, that's pretty impressive that I could, you know, but he really said, you're the worst guy I've ever seen when it comes to sushi. I was like, okay, so I'm passionate, don't have any natural gifts in it. Okay, so that's out. The third then is what you can add value to the world that will be enough where they'll pay you for it, where it's sustainable. So I could be really good at a particular thing and I'm really passionate about it, but It's underwater basket weaving. And nobody wants to buy baskets that I wove underwater. So then it's not viable. And so it actually becomes a drag rather than something that's fulfilling and sustainable and that you could support a family with, which inevitably that's a huge part of career. So think about it as three thens. And if you live in the center as much, and you can bounce back and forth, like I said, but if you live in the center of those vens, you'll find this incredible fulfillment in your life, and that it shifts and changes, waxes and wanes and ebbs and flows. But generally, if you take that approach, involving God in this process, turning your life over to him by using the hints that he's dropping at you through those three vens. We think we go to him and we say, what should I do? And wait around. That will never get answered. It will never get answered. You go, just go and try to find the packets and the hints that he gives you in those three circles, and you'll be able to zero in on it.
So when you were moonlighting as a cellist and everything before you'd gone big with the Piano Guys, did you ever feel like you were going to get there?
Well, at first, I wanted to be a famous musician, and I wanted it for the wrong reasons. And I think that's pretty human. And I don't fault myself for it, really. I don't beat myself up for it. And I'm so grateful God did not let me have it then. This was pre-mission, and I really had this sort of sandy foundation concept of fame and fortune. And, you know, in the back of my mind, I was like, I could make a difference and stuff, but that was just sort of a shade. Really, it was more about, I wanted to be famous. I wanted to be rich. A lot of us think that way, and I don't know where it really came from. There are lots of different sources, but I'm so glad I didn't get it then, because it would have been as a tidal wave swept me off my feet and carried me off to a place I'd never want to be. So be patient and know that your dead ends are detours, and have faith that your dead ends are detours. And don't be afraid to practice the principles that you want to have as a human being. And don't be afraid of failure. Like, make friends with failure. I wish somebody would have told me that earlier in my life. Is the more you're willing to put yourself out there. And this is what I love. And we're going to be getting into this about a mission, man. Talk about failure central. It is such a petri dish for failure. It is awesome. Like, when it's in the middle of it, it's not so awesome. But looking back, I'm so glad that I had an opportunity for 2 years to fall on my face and really recognize and be humbled and be submissive enough to recognize that I need a lot of work on a lot of things. And if I do it alone, I'm not going to get very far.
So on your Piano Guys adventures, that's kind of the thing, right? Is you play all these crazy places. Is there a favorite place of yours that you've played?
There's a natural arc to all aspects of life, and we try to defy this. Typically in life, you'll be heading up an arc and it'll peak and then it'll come back down. And we do things drastically and desperately to try to bend that arc back up in an unnatural way. But life is just natural arcs. And the secret, I love what Arthur Brooks talks about, this Christian social scientist. He talks about how instead of trying to bend that arc up with irrational behaviors and bad choices, find another arc that's related and still on its way up. And I want to talk about that later on, of where I am in that process, because the Piano Guys arc is actually declining at this point. And I used to be afraid of it. I used to be upset at that. I used to be embarrassed by it.
Fight it, yeah.
Yeah, but now I'm kind of like, this is exciting. It's an opportunity to do some arc jumping. So I just wanted to explain that, because yes, our MO was to find incredible locations, 7 wonders of the world, Scotland Castle, the Death Star, so many different places we film, and on a beach, cliff's edge, speeding train, beach, all of these fun places.
Pretty much you name it. It feels like you guys have done it.
And we loved it, and the public loved it. And this was when YouTube was user curated, which means that you, as you're watching YouTube, would decide what you want to see. You don't do that anymore. You don't decide what you see. An algorithm decides what you see. And be very warned, that algorithm has no interest in your personal well-being or health. It doesn't. Don't be a slave to the algorithm. Just keep in mind that if you're in charge, if you want to remain in charge, you've got to understand that the algorithm is what's making choices for you. But we started when it wasn't that way. There was no such thing as an algorithm. It was user curated. And thank goodness for that, because if we were to do it now, music videos don't work anymore, because the algorithm doesn't favor them, because they don't keep people on long enough.
Interesting.
And they don't sell products, because you're engrossed in the music, not in the car part that some dude's talking about as he's repairing the car.
Right.
So it's a big difference. So we actually don't do music videos anymore, and it makes me sad. I miss them. I really do miss them. They were a lot of work, but from the comments, it seems like they did some good in the world, and it was something that nobody was doing. And I know this is a long answer to your question of where is my favorite place, But that explanation is important to me to put out there because I don't want you to have the expectation, whoever's listening, I don't want you to have the expectations that once you've found your groove, that it'll stay that way for a long time. I think in today's world, there's so much shifting. It's vicissitudinal. I think it's to the point where it's so capricious that one moment it works and one moment it doesn't. And what you've got to do, and this is what the mission teaches you, is you've got to be psychologically flexible. That is the number one trait of happy people right now, according to a recent research study. Psychological flexibility. What does that mean? Well, that means when something doesn't turn out the way you think it's going to, or something changes dramatically or drastically in the moment, how do you react? Psychological flexibility says, okay, well, let's make the most of this. I can be flexible. Let's roll with it. That's cool. Inflexibility, psychological inflexibility is, you got to be kidding me. This is the dumbest, this is BS. This is the dumbest thing ever. No, and then all of a sudden, you're actually negating every bit of your possible eternal progression in that very moment, at least temporarily. So for us, yes, we made music videos, and some of my favorite places are the Great Wall of China and atop Chichen Itza. I loved Chichen Itza, and I rarely tell this story, but we were allowed to film on top of the ruins of Chichen Itza. Nobody's allowed to stand on those. Wow. And the only reason we were is because the head of all the archaeological sites, he had two sons that loved our music. Wow. And so he said, I love the way he said this. He looked at us when we asked for permission to film on these ruins. His assistant supervisor said, no, you're crazy. We'd never do that. Nobody ever gets to do that. And he looks around and he says, I cannot let you do this. But if I don't, my children will never forgive me. So he lets us on top of these ruins. And I got to tell you, as I'm standing on top of the ruins, I recited King Benjamin's speech.
Oh, that's cool.
And it gives me chills to think about it because we had just played the Great Wall of China. And here's what's interesting, guys. Emperor Qin of the Qin dynasty, he's the one that built the terracotta warriors. You're familiar with that, right? He spent decades and literally hundreds of thousands of lives of his subjects to build what? A tomb in which a terracotta, a clay army was supposedly going to protect him in the afterlife. He sacrificed everything in order to build something that was of zero value. Do you know when he died? 25 years later, King Benjamin was born. And here's a man that instead of insisting that people sacrifice their lives to build a false precept and tomb, he says, inasmuch as you are in the service of your fellow beings, you're in the service of your God. You can't imagine at that time how God-centric he was to preach that. He didn't even tax his people. He worked his own garden. So to stand on top of the ruins, whether he was there or not, it was not important to me. But we know enough that it might have been in that general vicinity. And to recite those words at the top of those ruins was a life-changing moment to me, a recognition of how powerful a life can be when it is given to God. And when God can work through that individual, how much he or she can impact the people around him. And that is my why of why I served a mission. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer. This is the problem. If you ask one question, it might be like, whoa, but remember, my superpower is ADHD. That's my weakness that's turned into a strength by God. Yeah. And the thing I love about it is this is so cool. It's such a cool principle. We have to remember your weakness should fuel your humility, not inflame your inadequacy. That's a big principle to understand for pre-mission, for on-mission, and post-mission. I'll say it again. Your weakness should fuel your humility, not inflame your inadequacy. In other words, your weakness shouldn't make you feel like you're not enough. Your weakness should remind you that his grace, meaning Jesus Christ's grace, is sufficient for you.
Great. So Skibby had a couple questions about classical music that I think Skibby, I'm very curious to hear your perspective on.
Let's elevate this conversation, Sam. You want to go get a sandwich or something?
Steve, we could spend hours. I'm telling you, we could spend hours. You and I are both classically trained musicians. Classical music, we feel it. It runs through our veins. We love it, right?
Yeah.
And you're talking about how the world is shifting and attention spans are shifting. The things that people watch are shifting. I have felt personally a decline in the desire to be involved in classical music. People don't know classical music as well as I think they used to. And that hurts me because I feel like it's got this great value and can add so much to people's lives. So what role do you see classical music playing in our world's future? And how do you find ways to try and make classical music relevant to a contemporary audience?
Oh, man. Okay, so we have 3 hours for this answer, maybe.
We're going to do a Joe Rogan episode here.
That's what we should. That's really funny.
That's
Actually,
your next. That's your next rising arc, Stephen. You're going to bring on musicians, and you're just going to go for hours.
Gosh,
That'd be pretty cool, actually.
Skibby, it's an awesome question, and I'd love to really get as in-depth as possible. Maybe kind of rein me in a little bit, because this is a subject I feel very passionate about. In fact, I have a book in the works that will never get finished because I'm ADHD. It's How to Teach Your Kids to Love Classical Music. And I don't mean that that's exclusively the music that they would ever listen to. I don't have that false expectation. But I do believe it is the most nutritious music you can listen to.
I agree.
Now, having said that, I would never impose broccoli only on my children every meal. It would be silly. I think it would be unwise, but it would be unhealthy even. Even though it's healthy, it's extremism. And there are classical elitists that are single-handedly destroying classical music because they're insisting on extreme fidelity to the music. And I actually don't believe that. I believe classical music is the ancestor of all the music we listen to today, and it should be respected and appreciated as such. But it is the ancestor, and it is not as alive today as it once was. And that's okay. Let us appreciate it in the context that it was presented, and understand that as we build our cornucopia of our music library, that classical music should be a fundamental veggies aspect of the plate, of our playlists plate. And it's hard for people to wrap their heads around that, because classical pieces are volatile, they're long, they feel exclusive and esoteric in the sense that they push people out rather than invite them in, because you have to understand a certain level.
It's not
So
that
there's a few
instant
things.
gratification.
Yeah, right. And again, so if that's the nutrition, if that's the veggies, what's our sugar? Our sugar is our pop music. And it's been just like American diet, not the other country, not so many other countries. We have super concentrated sugar to the point where we've got it down to a high fructose science, where we're not just putting sugar in, we're putting highly toxic levels of super concentrated unnatural sugars in our food that don't need it. I mean, can you believe that we have orange juice with added sugar? That is blowing my mind. Like, really? Are you serious? You're adding sugar to orange juice?
75% of your daily sugar intake for breakfast.
It's ridiculous. And so that's what our music industry is right now, is it's super highly concentrated sugar bursts and sugar hits.
Yep.
But I promise you, it comes with a crash. It really does. If that's all you're listening to day in, day out, there's not nutritious content and value. Now, I love dessert. You're not going to tell me to get rid of dessert. I don't believe in extreme diets that push stuff out. I believe in moderation. All foods should be enjoyed. And so I believe in pop music, but I believe it in moderation. And do I listen to classical music day in, day out? I don't. I probably am the biggest fan of classical music that I know of in my circle. And yet I still don't listen to it day in, day out. I believe in what Bobby McFerrin said. He said, if you listen to only one kind of music your whole life, it's like insisting on living in one room of your house your entire life. Nobody would ever do that. But what the piano guys have done is we've approached it as a green smoothie. So we will have pop music, and that's our fruit, but we'll put in spinach and kale, and we'll sometimes hide it in there.
You're tricking people.
Yeah, well, a little bit, but at the same time, it's there. And so as the children drink our music, they're actually getting highlights and snippets of classical music in there. And hopefully that's triggering some part of their psyche, their brain, into craving more nutrition and adding more holistic health to their playlist. So honestly, it comes with time. The future of classical music, if it is to have a future, is a lot of what symphonies are trying to do to stay alive, where they'll have pop music, they'll have guest artists, they'll have movies playing as they play film score, which film score is the classical music of today. I know some people will disagree with me of that, but I think that's what it is. And so I think you have to be creative about the way you disseminate it and invite people in. But here's my favorite way of all. Victor Borg is a big hero of mine. And do you know who that is, Skibby?
I don't.
It's okay, you don't. He's actually been deceased for a while. He was a Danish pianist, one of the greatest pianists that ever lived. And my dad would take me to the symphony hall when I was a kid, and I was ADHD. And so it was hard. It was really hard. Like, I'd get antsy. And I remember one time I was doing this with my programs, like a pirate. Yeah. My brother started to do it, and I hit the program into his eye, and it flew up into the air and hit the guy in the front of us. And that was just kind of how it was going. But I was looking around and I was kind of used to the people I saw there. And then my dad took me to a Victor Borge concert. I looked around and I said, most of these people I've never seen inside this classical music hall. Why? And then he showed me. Victor Borge used comedy, self-deprecation, vulnerability, teasing himself and the industry of classical music and the toxic perfectionism that exists in it. I remember one time he plays this little opera snippet and he's like, and then the chorus comes in and then they go off the stage and nobody knows why except for Mozart. Mozart's dead. You know, he would just kind of make fun of it a little bit. And everybody was laughing. And then Skibby, the most beautiful moment was, I still remember it. It was so powerful to me. In the second half, he turns off the comedy and turns off all of this stuff that everybody's there to see. And he says, can I play you something? And he plays a classical piece of music on the piano as pure as can be, with no adulteration, nothing altered. And everybody is captivated. And if I played them that without the context and the preparation that Victor Borge had put into it, I think they would turn off their brain. But the fact that he warmed them up to it and built a relationship with them, broke the fourth wall, connected with them in a meaningful way, he could then connect with them with classical music. So if we cannot connect with our audiences and always want to put ourselves on a pedestal, I'm the performer, you're the audience, classical music will die. So my favorite way is to connect with the audience, invite them in. And I love to do it in Piano Guys. We do it with self-deprecation, a little dorkiness, and a lot of humor.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I know I've seen a lot of classical concerts, piano, and the pianist walks on the stage, doesn't look at the audience, plays a song, gets up, walks off the stage, doesn't look at the audience. So I think you're totally right. The relationship is what creates the interest.
Right. And that's antiquated. That's the old way of classical music. So if we want to keep it alive, it has to have connection. Everybody knows that classical music will engage the brain and develop it far better than any pop song ever could. So why aren't we using it more? Because it's hard. I have to teach parents how to use the right kinds of classical music, the right moments of classical music. If I show you, play this piece for your kids, but only play the 3 minutes from this to this and ask them what they think the title of the piece is. And it's so fun to watch kids try to figure it out, you know?
It's so cool.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
It becomes an active then rather than passive.
Exactly. Like dance, give me an interpretive dance of this piece. That's what my dad used to do with us. We'd love that. We would do pictures in an exhibition and we'd try to figure out what the title of the piece was based on the automata poetic elements in the music. And it was so much fun. Or if I say, kids, I want to play you the 1812 overture and I'm going to play you the exciting part where the cannons go off. And we're going to really enjoy that. And that's so cool. Can you imagine what this is like out on the battlefield? And then I say, can I play you 2 minutes of the first part of the piece? And it's a cello choir that Tchaikovsky uses that nobody knows. And it is mind-blowingly beautiful. And when I play it for my kids after I prep them with something that's fun and engaging, they sit there and listen and they're captivated. The other thing is you're your family's DJ. And just remember that. Don't let the radio do it because the radio is going to destroy your children's brains. The radio has no interest in your children's well-being. So you build the playlist. If you do not have good playlists built, you need to do that as a parent as soon as you can. So that's like a Sunday morning playlist. What kind of mood do you want? What about preschool, like before they go to school? What kind of playlist do you want? I love a For King and Country. It has energy, but there's positive messages in it. Don't just turn on Benson Boone and assume that you can trust him. You can't. Like the industry is just absolutely not trustworthy. So you build the playlist. You decide you're the DJ of your home. But my recommendation is slip in classical music once in a while. And even though your kids will be like, what's this? Just be like, oh, it's just something I want to listen to. So act like it's what you want to listen to, even though you're doing it for them. And you'll notice your kids will actually focus better on their homework. My recommendation is to turn on Baroque music. The Baroque period is a nice, fluid, a little less volatile and more consistent energy to it. And that has been shown to be the best for ADHD brains and focus, by the way. That's Bach, Vivaldi, those composers. So if you play that music in the background, it doesn't have to be very loud. You actually will notice a mood change in your house and you'll notice actually increased productivity.
And this is one of the coolest conversations. This is like really fascinating to hear from you.
We're talking about a mission, but hey, Skippy started it.
This is honestly, I could go forever. This is super cool. I'm very fascinated by this.
Studied and engrossed myself in because I know that we underestimate what's happening in our children's brains when they listen to music. Please never buy in to the fallacious argument that, oh, I don't listen to the lyrics. Your subconscious listening to lyrics. Okay, so what's the next argument? Do you know that 17 out of 20 songs are explicit in the top 20 Spotify songs? That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable that our children are listening to explicit material. Now, my kids will say they bleep it out when it's on the radio. And I say, you bet they do. But did they bleep out the messages? Because the messages are nothing you want your kids to live their life like. It is everything dark. I'm talking about the explicit songs. It's everything wrong about life put into song. Yes, could it be argued that it's cathartic? Maybe, but I don't buy that. It's this weird direction that was started by, God, why is her name slipping my mind? She always has the dark, dreary eyes and the weird green hair, and she's, help me out with it. Who is it?
Billie Eilish?
Yes, Billie Eilish. So she started this trend where her music's cool. It's got like this really dark, kind of cool, moody vibe to it.
Yeah.
But it was cool to be depressed and upset and mad and not happy. And I'm like, this is not cool. I don't like this at all. And so that was a trend. And then Olivia Rodrigo started to pick it up. And I was like, I don't like where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
So just don't trust the music industry. Don't.
Yeah.
Composing is such an amazing world. And sometimes it feels like some people have got it and it just comes to them naturally. And for some people, it's like, how could I sit down and write something original on the piano? So I'm just curious to get a little inner look on what you do in composing. Do the tunes come to you? Do you sit down and say, oh, I'm going to mash a song with another song. What song should I do? Are you thinking in chords? How does composition come to you?
Okay, a lot of different directions we could take this answer. First is I do believe that composition is nurture and nature. I think both factor in. I really do. I think it's undeniable that in the premortal life, some of us spent more time at it. That's the only explanation I can give. I have a child that can make a ball sing. You put a ball in his hand and he is magic.
Yeah.
But at an instrument, he struggles. He does. And we do both anyway. We insist on that in our house because Plato said the ultimate woman or man is the athlete musician. And I believe that. So we believe in limited agency in our home.
Dictatorships in homes are allowed, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of convenient. So, but we give when we believe in agency, we give our children two choices. They can play an instrument and eat or not. Those are the two choices that they get. But then I see my daughter and she, without having even learned the piano, sits down and she can play something by ear that comes out of nowhere. So there is nature nurture. Now, because there's nature nurture, everybody can learn to compose. I don't think anybody should think that there's something against them that won't allow them to. But I think what's underestimated is why do we think that we have to sit down and a melody will come out of thin air and we'll be able to command it to be on the page? My recommendation is start with arranging. Arranging is way more fun in the beginning. Yeah. Take a piece of music that you love the melody, it's so sticky, or a chord progression that you can't get enough of, and play with it. Have fun. Just don't do it for success or failure. Push those labels out and just play. And just play with it. And that's underestimated. It's an underestimated tool. I want you to take a Beatles song that's really happy-go-lucky, I want to hold your hand, and I want you to turn it into a funeral song. Make it something that would be dark and dreary or a horror movie soundtrack. Start playing around. I know that sounds funny. One of the things we did Piano Guys once was we turned Eye of the Tiger into a lullaby that you could actually fall asleep to. Because we wanted to see what happens when you take something that's so recognizable out of its original context and put it in a context you'd never expect to hear it. And it's fun. It's playtime. It just feels like playtime. So that's what I would recommend for people that want to get into composition is start with arranging. Just play around with it. And then there was one aspect of your question that I didn't address.
How do like original compositions come to you? When you sit down to do something, what's your process?
Okay, so first of all, there's a principle that's underestimated, especially in today when it's a chat GPT culture. We want somebody else to do the work and to have the well that we can draw from. And I think that has its place. But you have to understand, you need material to create. So it's good to fill your mind. Let's use like a sculptor. A sculptor has to pick up a big block of something and begin chipping away at it. He can't just chip away at the air and expect the sculpture to appear. So I actually really like listening to lots of different kinds of music, and I can't listen to it passively. Some people study to music. I'm like, that's crazy. So I do active listening where I'll actually take notes and create a little hall of fame where I love little moments in songs where I'm like, I don't know how he did this modulation here. How did he use this inversion to get me to want the next chord? And I write it down and I sort of start collecting things. And those things actually inform my compositional process. It's like being on a mission. You can't go on a mission having never read the scriptures and never prayed before and never had any things that were hard in your life, because it's a dry well that you need to draw from something. The Spirit's got to work with something. It can't pull things very much out of the thin air. So that's one of the things I'd recommend is a nice deep well of material, number one. And number two, this is the hard one. You have to understand that it does not come at your beck and call. Someday the creativity train will come into the station, and other days it'll pass right by you or it never show up in the first place. And that's okay. Don't expect consistency. Just keep at it. You be consistent, but don't expect your creativity to be consistent. You'll have good days, you'll have bad days. You've got to write a lot of garbage until you find the treasure. And I think that's what it's about, is you just got to get down, you just get into it. And it's so exciting if you just understand that you're digging for gold. You're not expecting it to just be on the ground in front of you.
I love it. We grew up in Western music, learning major scales, all that stuff. Yeah. When you went to your mission in South Korea, boom, it's a totally different type of music. And I read your bio on your website, and it's like, you're creating cellos that have sounds like sitars and music that is not Western music at all. Right. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts on world music and how Korean music influenced your love of music.
First of all, world music is the most underestimated world peace tool we have in terms of intercultural and international relationships, understanding, appreciation, and it is so much fun. I'll give you this analogy. When I was growing up, my dad was a meat and potatoes guy, and he was the most brilliant man I ever knew in my life. And he's the one that taught me to love classical music. He loved it so much in front of me, I couldn't help but pick up on it. And that's rule number one of the book that I will never finish. So he was a meat and potatoes guy. We would go to steakhouses, and I'll never forget when I tasted Thai food for the first time. And it was this explosion of flavor, like somebody had changed my life from black and white to Technicolor. And I feel like when we listen to world music, it adds so much color to our existing palette that we draw from, that we paint the world with, that we paint our thoughts with, that we paint our understanding of others with. Naturally, we all have this palette, and I would love for people to add more color to that palette. And one of the ways to do that is to seek appreciation and understanding of different cultures' music. You'll see that in the piano guys. You'll see all kinds of music in our music. You'll see Indian, you'll see African, you'll see Scottish and Celtic, you'll see South American. Because number one, it would challenge me to get outside of my normal compositional, I hate to say this word, but I feel like cannibalism a little bit, like eating myself up. I can get out of that a little bit and literally explore the world. And it started with Korea. And here's why, on my mission. And I actually served two missions. I served one in Korea and one in New York. I served half of mine in Korea, half of mine in New York. But what was interesting is I grew up in a meat and potatoes family that didn't know much about the world. When I got a Korea mission call, I had to look at the world map. I didn't know where Korea was. I didn't know what it was. And that seems silly now. But honestly, back in 95, a lot of us didn't know the Eastern culture as much. So I go there. Instead of steak and potatoes, I'm eating kimchi for breakfast. I'm eating cold seaweed soup for breakfast. And some of it was a little hard to get down, but most of it was so good that all of a sudden I felt like I had entered literally a new world, but also figuratively a new world in my life of understanding, and not only my painting palette, but coincidentally my actual palette. Mm-hmm. And so as we instruct our palette, we add paint to our palette is what I mean. But then I started hearing the music. Now, pop music today in Korea is the K-pop sort of thing. We're going to put that aside entirely. That's a different conversation. Yeah. But traditional Korean music predated European music by 1,000 years.
Wow.
And when I wrap my head around that, I'm like, okay, this was OG. This was the OG music that existed on the earth. And so I really tried to appreciate and understand why they actually used a simpler scale, 5 notes,
Yep.
right? Instead of the traditional 12 tone or 8 notes.
Yep.
7 notes, 8 notes, and the chords that they would use. And that actually opened my mind. So not only was I opening my palette, adding paint to my palette, but I was also adding compositional tools to my musical toolkit. And that led me to explore world music. And it actually caused me to explore the cello, which had been traditionally bowed and pizzicatoed once in a while.
Mhm.
I was like, what else could this instrument do? Could I
So
make
cool.
it sound like a Chinese fiddle? Could I make it sound like a sitar? Could I make it sound like things that it's never sounded like before? And I really do think that that observation you made, Skibby, that it really did begin engrossed in the Eastern culture, which would have never happened on a vacation or a trip
Mhm.
there, but happened as a result of going all in the culture of Korea.
That's so cool.
Missions are amazing. They just change things, huh?
I love it.
Your point about that is great because you can't learn that on a vacation. You have to be exactly what you said, totally immersed for an
Yes.
extended period of time. And that could be language, that could be culture, that could be music in this case. But that's why it's so different from any other experience that's available to most people anytime in their lives. It's really pretty cool.
This story would illustrate the point. When I'm on a vacation, when I'm on a trip, even if I go for a month or two, this would never happen. I'm on my mission and I'm walking around what is a very poor neighborhood. And I hadn't experienced poverty. I grew up in Utah, for heaven's sakes. Like, we don't have poverty like other countries have poverty. And I remember I walk into this home. It's dirt floor. It's got a tin roof, a corrugated tin roof. And I'm talking to this guy. He's 4'5". We're sitting on the ground. He's offering me the food, what little he has. And I will never forget the conversation I have with him about how grateful he is for what he has in his life. And I dug into that. I said, I don't understand. You got to tell me how? And to appreciate someone's real gratitude for the absolute basic things of life and a God who loves him. How could I have experienced that otherwise? How could I have experienced that otherwise? And that informed my life in such a profound way that I could go deeper with my own personal gratitude as a result of seeing somebody sitting on a dirt floor talking face to face with somebody who opened his heart up to me and his home and his food and proved to me the divine principle of gratitude all starts with being grateful for God and the very fundamental things that he gives us. And I mean, where else am I going to get that?
Yeah, nowhere, honestly. I don't know that you can.
Yeah.
Got us all in tears, man.
Thanks. I mean, maybe
a
maybe
lot.
it's brought memories up to you too. And this,
Yeah,
for
those
sure.
of you who are listening, don't focus on how hard it's going to be. Don't focus on that. Focus on your transformation and how incredible it's going to be for you to experience transformational things that will level you up so profoundly. Think about it in terms of a simple video game, and that's a very simplistic way to explain it. But think about discovering a new land and adding things to your arsenal and your avatar to the point where you are leveled up and you can have greater capacity to do more things in your life, a greater love for people, deeper relationships, and greater desires to do good. Let me tell you, it is so wonderful to serve God and to serve others because it forces out your useless cares and the things that don't matter, the small potatoes in your life. It forces them out to the point where you no longer desire to do things that won't do you or anybody else good. You begin to desire good continually. And that is such a powerful thing in life because it will bring you incredible joy and it will bring you incredible fulfillment that you could not experience without giving yourself to something that is higher than you are at a time that is the most selfish point of your existence. Don't feel like I'm insulting you. That's just, we all go through that. 18, 19 years old, it is the most selfish point of life. Why would God ask us to go on a mission at that point? Because he knows all things. And he knows that if we're out serving others, we won't be caught up in our own problems, in our own head to the point where we actually trip over our own feet, face plant, and maybe never recover.
So you've mentioned a lot of things that you feel like your mission was helpful for: failure, psychological flexibility, greater desires to do good, gratitude. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you feel like influenced your life that you picked up from your mission?
Yes. Number one thing is building positive relationships with people you work with. It is so underestimated. And I think that's the number one thing I learned from my mission, other than personal testimony growth, was learning to work with people that were difficult to work with or that weren't compatible with you. And you may say, well, I don't want to go do that. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Because you can't always pick who you work with. And often you're with somebody that maybe in a marriage or in a business partnership that is different than you are. And how are you going to find middle ground that's better and not insist on your way or be just simply a limp fish when they want their way? How do you do that? What better place to practice when you're in the service of others and when you and a companion are working towards something that's higher than yourself? And this is what I've learned. Whatever relationships you're in, if your aim together is to go after something that's bigger than yourselves, you will find that the attrition that occurs naturally in a relationship will polish you instead of demolish you. Let me explain what I mean. If two rocks are being rubbed together, this is something called attrition. Attrition is when something is worn down as a result of rubbing up against something else. And two things can happen of attrition. A rock can be polished. In other words, the rough edges can be worked off, or there's so much of it that the rock actually eventually pulverizes and demolishes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've discovered is the difference between polish and demolish is the higher cause, is something that's bigger than yourself. So my wife and I, our higher cause is to build an eternal family.
Yeah.
And that is why our attrition between the two of us is polishing and not demolishing. When you're on a mission, the two of you can get in simple spats about the pettiest things. But if you focus on the unifying principle of helping others come unto Christ, the attrition between the two of you can be polishing instead of demolishing. That is a wonderful principle to learn that's not being taught to you in school. And honestly, your siblings don't count. Yes, they help a little bit, but they're family. And so they're always going to be around. And so we don't try as hard sometimes in those situations. Yeah. And maybe we push them away when we don't feel like, it's like, oh, I don't want to deal with you right now. Well, on a mission, you can't do that.
Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't. You're kind of stuck. And I got to tell you, it's awesome. It's not awesome during it, but it is so awesome in retrospect and what it's taught me. The Piano Guys partnership, we have 4 of us. John and I are the performers, and then we have a music producer and a video producer. We are so different and so the same at the same time. But we have had multiple moments, at least a half dozen that I can think of, where we would have broken up as a band. Had it not been for us understanding this principle of unifying each other to a higher principle and a cause, and using prayer to unify ourselves, to forgive each other, the principle of forgiveness, the principle of understanding and non-judgmentalism, all of these gospel principles, loving them as much as you love yourself, all of these principles that we teach, you get to practice them on your mission with somebody else that you didn't choose and that kind of bugs you. So what are you going to do? I got to tell you, man, it's awesome. I have a better marriage as a result of my mission. I had some tough companions. And you know what? They might be on podcasts right now saying I was a tough companion. And that's okay.
This is the nature of it, right?
Yeah, it is. It's just the nature of it. Don't be afraid of it, man. Go after it. And I love this. When we talk about it in the Doctrine and Covenants, there's a word we miss. It's in section 18. You've heard the scripture before, but it says, if you should bring one soul unto me, how great shall be your joy if you bring one soul unto me, right? And often we think that that's someone we're going to go out and find on the street and convert.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it's missing the point of the scripture first. That one soul first is you.
1,000%.
Then it's your companion. And I'll tell you a story right after I finish this principle. But here's the word we miss. In the scripture, it says, how great shall be your joy in heaven. But then we don't say the rest of it. How great shall be your joy in heaven with him. And on my mission president came to me and he said, I'm going to give you a companion and you're his last chance. If he can't cut it with you, I'm sending him home. And I was like, yeah, I got this. Like, hero, I'm going to go in, I'm going to fix him. It's going to be so awesome. I'm going to teach him the gospel and we're going to get along. And oh, it was a disaster. I went in there self-righteously thinking I was going to fix him. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. We didn't get any work done. We were butting heads. We were upset at each other all the time. He was purposefully doing things that he knew would bug me. just because I was trying to fix him. I didn't understand that principle then. I do now. So I go to the mission president. He says, how's it going? I say, you send him home. I think you should send him home. He is not doing me a service. He's ruining my mission. He's ruining it for other people in our district. He's not doing any of the work. Send him home. And Sam, I will never forget when the mission president looked at me and said, so disappointed. He loved me and he was so loving, but he was so disappointed. And he said, he said, Elder Nelson. He said, Elder Nelson, that's the wrong answer. If I send him home now, we'll lose him forever. Go back and start again. And so I went back humbled sufficiently and I got on my knees. Oh, dudes, when you're listening to this, when you're on your mission, man, I hope you have experiences like this. It is so informative and so transcendent what it can do for us. I got on my knees and I said, Heavenly Father, I'm sorry. Will you please forgive me? Can I start over? What do I do? How do I do this? And the impression came, it just said, be his friend. So I started over the next day and I apologized to him. I started over. I went up on the roof. He would go up on the roof and practice nunchucks just to bug me, So I went up on the roof and I'm like, hey, will you teach me that? He's like, what are you getting at? What are you trying to do? I'm like, no, I really want to learn. So I learned nunchucks on my mission and we became really good friends and he stayed his whole mission. After my mission, I met him in Canada where I was playing a concert. And he came with his family and it was after the show and there is his wife and his children all sealed in the temple, glowing with light. And he gives me a hug and he says, Elder Nelson, he still called me Elder Nelson. Thank you for not giving up on me. And I said, Elder, I did. I gave up on you. But the Lord did not give up on either one of us. And that was the principle I learned, that God loved him just as much as he loved me. And I was self-righteously trying to do what I thought was the right thing, when really I should have backed up and just said, how great will my joy be in heaven when I'm with him in heaven if we do this right? So your relationships are going to be the most important thing to you in your life. You don't know that now, but you will know that eventually. The older you get, the more you recognize how little worth money is, how little worth career ends up being, how little worth so many things that you're worried about right now are, and how vitally important and eternally significant relationships are. What better place than on a mission to develop deeper relationships, better understanding, more compassion, less judgment, and a road to creating more meaningful, viable, wonderful, propitious relationships in your life.
Speaking of that, your son got his call to Korea. So what did that do to your relationship with him?
This is a cool story. So I got 9 months into Korea, so a year into my mission, basically after the MTC, and I'm in Korea and I get really sick. They think it's cancer. And so they pull me home and I spend 3 weeks as a companion to my dad, which is another story that I would love to tell on this podcast eventually, which would be really cool, how that all panned out, because I was a real pill when I was a kid. I was so hard because I couldn't figure out what this ADHD thing was. So my dad saw this transformation in me that the mission caused, that I was actually caring and understanding and aware of people around me instead of moody. I was so moody before my mission. And the Spirit helped me regulate that and empowered me to channel it rather than let it be, acting upon me. I was acting instead of being acted upon. 2 Nephi chapter 2. So my dad's seeing this transformation in me, and we both pray and fast that I'm going to go back to Korea. I'm going to get well again and go back to Korea. And I feel like that prayer was a yes. I really get a confirmation. I feel like what was a confirmation. And then I get recalled to New York when they figured out that it wasn't cancer and I could go back out. It was still painful, but I could work it out. And I was like, what was that? Didn't make any sense. And I kind of forgot about it. So then later on, I'm trying this Piano Guys thing and I'm missing a lot of significant events in my son's life. Eli, my firstborn, I want so badly to have you want this with your son, right? Your daughter, your son. Do you have a firstborn daughter or son?
Daughter.
Okay. With your firstborn daughter, don't you yearn for a deep relationship with her?
Oh yeah. More than anything, right?
Yeah. And milestones that you can hold on to, Red Sea moments between the two of you that you can relate to, right? That connect you. Well, I had missed a lot of those because I was on tour so much and the demand of my career was overextending me. So I prayed to Heavenly Father and I said, and this is what I learned on my mission. Like, if you have problems, you don't just try to figure them out on your own. You pray to Heavenly Father and then you work them out with him as he's walking with you, and he'll give you ideas and you go after them courageously. But you trust that he's got ideas that are better than yours and you work together on it. So I said, Heavenly Father, will you help me fill in the missing pieces of my relationship with my son? And I kind of had forgotten about that prayer. You ever say a prayer, you utter so sincerely, but then life goes on and you kind of forget you said it. So the minute my son read aloud the words Korea mission, I fell to the floor because I was so overcome. I would have never assumed that could be possible. Korea is so few missionaries, 3 missions with so few missionaries. I don't know, is it like 300 total of the 60,000 missionaries, something like that? And while I was on the ground, I saw in my mind's eye this vision of little puzzle pieces falling from the sky and filling the holes of that puzzle in my relationship with my son. And this impression that where God said, I had this figured out all along. Don't you worry. Just trust me. I've got you. And then I realized and recognized that I had said that prayer and then that was an answer to prayer. But there's more. And this is the Elder Scott principle. Whenever he would get revelation or feel something from God, he would ask, is there more? And it's such a cool question to ask from God because almost every time I ask that, there is more and it's even better. It's even cooler. And I do that in my scripture study. I do that when I get impressions. I do that when I feel like I get a good idea. Is there more? And in this case, I'm preparing to speak at the MTC while my son is there. I'm going to surprise him. They've asked me to come speak. And so they're going to put him on the front row and I'm going to surprise him. It's going to be so fun. And it was really fun. And as I'm preparing, the Spirit, an impression, whatever, the Spirit speaks to you according to your language. However you say, don't think that you have to have it like I have it. Don't feel like, well, I've never felt that before. That's okay. You work with God and the Spirit in your own way. I promise if you look for it, you'll figure it out. But in my way, often it comes as these little ideas and impressions and thoughts and feelings all almost at once, simultaneously. It's sort of like a grand symphony coming together and melodies sort of intertwining. And all of a sudden I see the resolution of harmonic progression because that's my language is music. So I'm preparing for the MTC and the Spirit impresses upon me something like, do you remember that prayer when you prayed and fasted that you could finish your mission in Korea? And I was like, yeah, thanks for that prayer that never got answered. The Spirit said, well, your son is going to finish it for you. And I recognized at that point that it's a way better answer to that prayer than if I would have finished it. Because now that my son can finish it for me, how much more are we eternally going to be intertwined and connected as father-son as a result of him finishing the mission I never finished? And that's something that I will never, ever be grateful enough to God for orchestrating in such a beautiful, insightful way that was prepared far before I could have ever imagined it to be prepared. So my message to you is that God has things lined up for you, you listeners, that if you show up for him, the things he has lined up for you are unimaginably epic and prodigious and cool and amazing and awesome. I promise you that as you turn your life over to him, show up for him, it's incredible. You will not believe the mountains he will help you climb and the views that you will have from the tops of those mountains.
That's an incredible way to end. I've listened to music that you've played for a long time. I remember listening to it on my mission. But man, the passion that you show for your music, for your mission, to me, it's so cool. And I think you're an incredible person. So thank you
Sam,
for taking time and being so sincere and telling your experience. I love it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I'm all in on this. I think it's a wonderful concept. And I really do think that we often try to decouple spiritual and temporal. And we are in error when we do that. I think spiritual and temporal are inseparably connected.
Yeah.
And so any spiritual gain on a mission, any temporal gain are all connected. When we live the rest of our life after our mission, we can constantly trace spiritual and temporal successes to our mission. So yeah, I love this concept. And I love the mission and what you're trying to accomplish here in convincing young men in particular, but young men and young women, that this is something that they should not push aside without deep, sincere, wonderful, powerful thought and prayer. And my plea to you is do it. Do it. And just show up. Show up. Start preparing now, and it could be just in small and simple ways. but get out there. And I promise you that every day after your mission, no matter where you go, no matter what happens on your mission, every day after your mission, you will recognize little packets that God will drop that will tie you back to the experience you had on your mission and will help you to be more emotionally well, desire to do good, and more successful in your life. I promise you, more successful in your relationships and valuing the things that matter most. And you will have greater capacity to experience joy in your life. And I promise you that.
Steve, you're the man.
Thanks, Sam. This is great.
Gotta love it, man. What a guy. Thanks again to Steve for his time, and thanks to my sister Skibby for her musical insights. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend and stick around for more episodes in the future. Thanks.